Hello students, welcome back to this series on discussion of previous papers, that is the UPSC Mains Examination 2022. In the previous sessions we had discussed the geography part of the GS-1. Today we are going to discuss about the history part of GS-1, and I think probably we would do it in two parts. In the initial video, we would do it with respect to the 10 markers, and then we would move into the 15 markers. Again, the modus operandi of the session is going to be very similar as that of the previous ones and as that of the IAS Purana that we have been doing. And when you look at this GS1 paper, especially in the context of history, as usual, the trend that follows in the context of history, you see, is that one question generally comes from the side of the culture. Then from there, you would see one question that appearing with respect to the East Indian Company and the British administration. And the third question that you would see coming from with respect to the revolt and the other aspects. Now here what is happening is, here when you look at the questions, the question number 1, question number 2 and question number 3 belongs to the history, and which are 10 markers. And when you look at these questions, what happens is, as usual, the trend is very similar. It is asking, how will you explain the medieval Indian temple sculptures representing the social life? Now the UPSC is very categorical in this particular section, talking about the medieval Indian temple sculpture. And it is asking about the interrelation that is existing between, or the indication that is provided by the medieval Indian temples and the social life. We have to look at the relation that is existing, right? Okay, now we'll discuss in the detailed solutions as we are going to do this particular video. And when you look at the second question, why did the armies of British East Indian Company, mostly comprising of Indian soldiers, win consistently against the more numerous and better equipped armies of then Indian rulers? Give reason. See the beautiful framing of question, right? That is very similar to such a kind of question that was asked in 2014. Why Battle of Panipats were fought in the Panipat as a region? Something very similar kind of question in the same line of thought, that they are saying that the British East Indian Company with Indian soldiers have always won over the Indian rulers, right? They are asking about the analytical aspect of this particular thing, right? You know that when you look at the history part, especially the modern part, as part of the questioning, you would see that there is always an analytical element that is provided. Now when there is this analytical element that is provided, automatically what happens is we need to analyze the chronological events that are present. As discussed in IAS Purana, the simplest way to answer any history question is to focus on the chronology. Once we are able to focus upon the chronology of the events that happened in the history, it is very easy for us to analyze these aspects, right? So this is what is with respect to the second question. Then the third question, why was there a sudden spurt in the famines in the colonial India since mid-18th century? Give reasons. Again an analytical question with respect to this, that it is talking about why there was a sudden spurt in the famines. Why there was a sudden spurt in the famines in colonial India since the mid-18th century? Why suddenly, right? They are asking about the reasoning about this question, right? These are the 10 markers that we are supposed to see. Now let's look at these questions, right? Now when you look at these questions, the detailed solution, let's have a look. Yes, the first question is talking about, let's look at this first question, right? Now here it is talking about that, how will you explain the medieval Indian temples? How will you explain the medieval Indian temples representing the social life, right? The simplest understanding you can bring in with respect to such a question, the dynamism that can be brought in, is we can talk about the Ramappa temple and the UNESCO status that was recently given. So, and we can say that these temples are the repositories of medieval societies. These temples are repositories of knowledge, repositories of social understandings, the social life that is seen, the religious life that is seen, that is present during these societies, during these time periods, right? And when we move on to the body part of this particular question, we can say that the medieval temple architecture representing the society, one, we can talk about the cultural aspect. The cultural aspect. And when you talk about this cultural aspect, it talks about the dance and music. For example, the Vitala Swami temple. The Vitala Swami temple, and which talks about the dance and music. Then caste. Then lower castes gaining importance, especially the Ramappa temple, that can be discussed. Then apart from that, we can also talk about the status of the women in this context, especially the Khajuraho temple. Then we can also discuss the trade systems that were flourishing during these medieval times, especially the trade of horses that was seen. And we can talk about an example of the Lepakshi temple, the Veerabhadra temple of Lepakshi, and there we can talk about the presence of galloping horses. Right? Then we can also discuss about the flourishment of social institutions that were seen in the temple architecture during these medieval times. And that is with respect to your marriage, we talk about Kalyana Mandapas. Kalyana Mandapas, the structures that were built during Vijayanagara, right? And we can also talk about certain structures that were present for the community gathering that were present in the temples, right? Then the other element is the justice delivery system. And when we look at this justice delivery system, that can be seen again with respect to your Chola and Pallava structures. There were special courtyards, that were present with respect to these structures, these temple structures, especially in Chola and Pallava for justice delivery. Right? And we can even talk about the status of women, and we can talk about this Ammanna Gudi. And Ammanna Gudi, which talks about the female deity taking a special position in the context of the temple architecture, that fundamentally shows what is the status of women, what is the gender parity that was maintained during these particular time periods. Right? Straight away, a simple question. And we can say that architecture acted as a means of expression. During these time periods. Right? Simple question, it demanded for you to substantiate this particular answer. And not only the substantiation with respect to this particular answer, but it also demanded certain element of understanding, certain element of analysis. That was what was talked in this particular question, right? Now, moving on to the second question. Now, when you look at the second question, it is asking about that why did the armies of British East Indian Company, mostly comprising of Indian soldiers, win consistently against more numerous and better equipped armies of Indian rulers? They are asking about, give the reasons for such a kind of trend that is seen, especially the armies which were filled with Indian soldiers of British Indian. How were they consistently winning in spite of the Indian rulers having a stronger army? Right? Now we can talk about this, that such a strong army of British East Indian Company as part of introduction has purely resulted in the territorial consolidation. The territorial consolidation of British has been a resultant of the strong army. That can be a simple introduction that can be talked about. Then moving on to the such reasons. The first reason, and the first and foremost reason, that there were specific policies. Now, on a broader basis, when you fundamentally look at the analysis of the question, you can see that although there were numerous soldiers number of soldiers that were present on the Indian side, although they were limited on the side of the British, the effective utilization of the tactical knowledge of the Indian soldiers, which played a greater role in the East Indian Company, taking that kind of territorial consolidation. That is what is supposed to be seen here, right? So, the first one is, it is talking about the specific policies, policies that were framed. For example, the ring fence policy, the divide and rule policy. These were framed categorically in order to consolidate the army, utilize the tactical knowledge of the Indian soldiers. Then, the second one is the strategic recruitment. And when you talk about the strategic recruitment on the side of the East Indian Company, you see that there is going to be a ethnic profile consideration. But whereas on the side of Indian rulers, it was more to do with the territorial recruitment. Territorial recruitment. Then, when you look at the third aspect, the structural organization and the central command, it was better organized. It was the command, there was no hierarchy of command, but it was all central, which resulted in reduction in the time of action, reduction in the response time, which again led to the effective nature of these armies. Whereas when you look at the Indian side, there were more decentralized command as well as the unorganized armies, right? And the last part, or this, the British loyalty of soldiers, that was there, and there was a greater scope of defection and skepticism that can be seen in the context of the Indian rulers, right? For example, when you look at this Anglo-Mysore Wars, that was a classic case for this, right? Anglo-Mysore Wars was a classic case for such a kind of defection, such a kind of skepticism that is seen on the side of other rulers that are present, other soldiers that are present. But whereas on the side of the British, we see that there was a consolidation, there was a unification, there was a structure, there was an organization which was consolidating the position. Then the third or the another aspect is the modernization of army, whereas the tactical or the traditional tactics, right? That is what is seen. And also it is the strength of mobilization. It is the strength of mobilization. So all these factors are fundamentally leading into the British East Indian Company dominating over the Indian rulers. Although the Indian rulers had a greater strength, a greater or better equipped with respect to the Indian soldiers. And we can conclude this particular answer by saying that the British tactics fundamentally led to this concept of European supremacy. This British tactics fundamentally led to this concept of European supremacy, which is fundamentally showing a territorial consolidation and rise of the British, advent of the British, that is purely using the native resources to consolidate their position. That is what is seen. Right? That is with respect to this particular question. Now moving forward, the third question, and when you look at this particular question, it is regarding that why was there a sudden spurt in the famines in the colonial India since the mid 18th century? Give the reasons. It is asking about there was a sudden spurt, and when you look at this, what happens is around 24 famines in the span of 50 years. Around 24 famines in the span of 50 years is what is seen here, right? That is what is the general observation, and you would see the regions like Odisha, regions like Bihar, regions like Madras, regions like the other parts of India, the Bengal regions had greater incidence of famines, right? And during this particular era, there was a sudden spurt, and the reasons for the sudden spurt is because the British policies, the revenue policies, because you know that famine is more of a comprehensive phenomena rather than a drought. It has got to do with the social effect, it has got to do with the economic effect, it has got to do with the food security impact, that it has also got to do with respect to the health impacts. Right? It is more a comprehensive phenomena. Right? When you look at the second one, the British infrastructural obligations that are seen, for example, the construction of railways, the drain of resources. And you also see that one particular system that is present, that is the guarantee system that is seen as part of the Indian railways and the construction of those railways. And the next one is the British agricultural policies. You would see that the phenomena of commercialization of agriculture coming in, and you would see one particular crop called indigo. Was taking the precedence, which was affecting the food security, right? Then the next one is the deindustrialization phenomena. When you talk about this deindustrialization phenomena, it led to the crumpling of small artisans, right? And also you would see that there was this phenomena of inverted trade policies that are present. And because of these inverted trade policies, automatically what happens, my dear, there is this crumpling of the artisans that were present, for the reason the finished goods were being taken at a cheaper price, right? Then the British forest legislations, and when you talk about this, forest food resources started to reduce. They started emphasizing upon these regulations. They started emphasizing upon the forest administration. They started emphasizing upon the regulation with respect to the entry, with respect to the utilization. Then we also have the prevalent epidemics that were present. And when you look at the different commissions that were put forth, that was Strachey Commission, that was James Lell Commission, that was present during these particular time periods, right? Now, so what happens is this famine although has a natural element, in the context of epidemics, but it was more aggravated. It was more aggravated by the British policy, by the British administration. That is what is we are supposed to show in this particular question. That is what is the fundamental basis of this particular question that they are showing. Due to the self-interested policies of British, the famines occurred in regular fashion. The famines occurred in regular fashion. Right? So this is with respect to the third question. Okay, so with this, when you look at these 10 markers, what do you fundamentally understand, my dear, is that the questions are little analytical. The questions are little analytical, but you cannot afford to forget the factual base of the history to do the analysis. And if you have to get your analysis right, one particular simplest trick that I mentioned in the starting of the video also, it is the chronology that has to be maintained. Once you maintain the chronology, once you have the factual base, automatically the analysis becomes easy and it is a straightforward question. Right? We would do the 15 markers in the next video. Thank you.